Hello, it is Saturday, April 17th, 2021. This episode of the pod was awesome. You will love the conversations we had today. First up was John and Andy from the Outlap F1 podcast to discuss Formula One and the preview of the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Learned a lot about Formula One, awesome conversation. You will definitely love it. You can find their podcast on pretty much wherever you find your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, anywhere, you name it, they'll be on. Also check them out on Instagram and Twitter at Outlap F1 Podcast. Then Micheal, our contributor, he's back. And we discussed LaMarcus Aldridge and Julian Edelman retiring, Sam Darnold of the Panthers, where does Teddy Bridgewater go now that they've acquired Sam Darnold, and we talk about the NFL draft. I know it's a little late to talk about Sam Darnold, but we weren't able to talk about it last week, and I wanted to mention it, and Micheal was definitely excited to talk about that. And as always, we have our poll question, highlight of the week, the sports lightning round, questions from Instagram, and much more. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at sportsdown_podcast or on Twitter at sportsdownpod because we are doing a new drawing. And if you want to go check that out, I think we're going to be doing starting on Tuesday. So definitely check that out. I'm definitely excited. It's going to be fun and it's going to be something very expensive and something you guys will really like. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's begin today's episode of the podcast. And now, time for the highlight of the week.
Have another scoring option next to him. Having Buddy back in the lineup means so much, but you guys, I can't help but realize how much this team misses Rashawn Holmes in this game.
Why are you doing it to that dude?
Technical?
Come on.
Stop it. Come on.
And now it's time for a weekly poll question. You can vote on Instagram and Facebook at sportstown_podcast or on Twitter at sportstownpod. And today we have two questions. The first was, is LaMarcus Aldridge a Hall of Famer? And 67% of you said no. He was good, but he was not great or good enough to make it to the Hall of Fame, but he definitely had a great career and he will definitely be missed. So sorry to hear about LaMarcus Aldridge. Also, the other question was, is Julian Edelman a Hall of Famer? And that was unanimously no. I think majority of, I think is like 85% said no. So unbelievable. Julian Edelman, great player, but not a Hall of Famer. So thanks again for voting. You can vote on Instagram at Facebook at sportstown_podcast or on Twitter at sportstownpod. And now, time for the Sports Lightning Round. Arizona has found their new head men's basketball coach. The Wildcats have hired Gonzaga assistant Tommy Lloyd to be their new head coach. Arizona fired Sean Miller last week because he was paying recruits to play for the Wildcats. He was at Arizona for 12 seasons. Lloyd is 46 and has been an assistant with Gonzaga since 2000. According to sources, Lloyd was waiting to be the next head coach of the reigning WCC champs after Mark Few. He had turned down many offers before Arizona. However, Arizona was too good of a job to turn down. The former Bulldogs assistant beat out Pacific head coach Damian Stoudemire, Jason Terry, and Lakers assistant Miles Simon. Despite Lloyd having much success as an assistant with Gonzaga, some of the alumni that include Gilbert Arenas are not pleased with the new hiring at Arizona. After being hired, Lloyd stated, "I'm extremely grateful to the president, Robbins, and Dave Heek for the incredible opportunity to lead one of the country's most storied men's basketball programs. Last season, Arizona men's basketball was suspended and did not play in the postseason. There is much work ahead for Tommy Lloyd." Star big man for the Lakers, Anthony Davis, has been cleared for full contact practice, which means that the 2017 All-Star Game MVP could be back playing for the defending champs very soon. Davis has not played since February 14th with a calf strain. During those games, the Lakers struggled. To make it worse, the Lakers lost LeBron James and have slumped down to the 5th seed. There is a chance that the Lakers could have the former Pelican Anthony Davis back for Monday's game versus the Mavericks. However, head coach Frank Vogel stated to not get your hopes up, but there is a chance. He also said that he will have a minute restrictions for Davis and wants him to come back slowly to avoid another injury. The Lakers are currently 34-22 and have the 5th seed in the West. They have a 3.5 game lead over the 7th seed Mavs. If the Lakers can get their roster healthy before the postseason starts, most of the teams in the West will be fearful of the defending NBA champs. Bad news for Warriors fans. Number 2 overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft, James Wiseman, will be out for the remainder of the year with a meniscus tear. The former Memphis product injured his meniscus on April 10th and had surgery on it the following week. The Warriors expect him to be back in a couple weeks, but according to doctors, he will not be ready till next season. It's been somewhat of a disappointing first year for the number 2 overall pick. Wiseman has looked great at times, but has also looked terrible some games. He has missed some games because of COVID-19 protocols. He also injured his wrist earlier in the season, but returned right away. Golden State will hope they will have a better Wiseman for next season. However, there have been multiple rumors that say Wiseman could be part of a trade that would send another star to the 2017/2018 NBA champs. Steph Curry has been the only bright side for the Warriors, and if they want to keep the former MVP in the Bay Area, they will have to acquire another superstar. 13-time NBA All-Star, 3-time NBA champion, former Finals MVP, Dwayne Wade has purchased a minority stake in the West-leading Utah Jazz. Wade is a former player for the Heat, Bulls, and Cavs. According to 2006 Finals MVP, he was inspired by former NBA players Shaq, MJ, and Grant Hill, who all have minority stakes in NBA franchises. Dwayne Wade will join good friend Ryan Smith in having a stake in the Jazz. Wade stated, this goes way beyond the dream I had to play basketball in the NBA. I've seen Shaq do it in Sacramento. I've seen Grant Hill do it in Atlanta. I've seen Jordan do it in Charlotte. If this partnership is going to be anything like my relationship is with Ryan, there are going to be a lot of things that I'll want to be involved in. At the time of this recording, the Jazz have the best record in the league at 41-14. There is a good chance that Wade could have another ring by summer, but this time it would be through ownership instead of being a player. Many current and former players such as Chris Paul and Magic Johnson congratulated the TNT NBA analyst. Michael Jordan, the greatest to ever play basketball, will speak on behalf of Kobe Bryant at the 2021 Basketball Naismith Hall of Fame induction. Jordan was a close friend to the 5-time NBA champion Bryant. MJ also spoke at Bryant's funeral in February. The 27/2008 league MVP passed away on January 26, 2020 in a plane crash in Calabasas, California. Jordan had a great speech at Bryant's funeral and was close friends with Kobe. He also stated, "As I get to know him, I wanted to be the best big brother I could." The induction will take place on May 15th at Springfield, Massachusetts. The other notable Hall of Famers will be 5-time NBA champion Tim Duncan, former league MVP Kevin Garnett. Duncan will be represented by former teammate David Robinson. KG will be represented by Isaiah Thomas. This just might be the greatest basketball Hall of Fame class ever. Amanda Nunes has her next fight booked. The Lioness will take on Juliana Pena at UFC 265 in August. UFC President Dana White was the first to report the news and stated that Pena has been persistently asking him to fight the number 1 overall pound-for-pound female fighter. Pena is 2-1 in her last 3 fights. Her last bout was a victory over Sarah McMahon at UFC 257 in January. Her overall professional MMA record is 11-4. Amanda Nunes is unanimously the greatest female fighter of all time and is fresh off her knockout win over Megan Anderson at UFC 259. The fight between Nunes and Pena is scheduled for August and is currently the only fight on the card for UFC 265. Martin Truex Jr. has won the pole at Richmond. Truex Jr. of the number 19 Toyota Camry is fresh off his second win at Martinsville and is the only driver in NASCAR to win more than one event this season. At the time of this recording, Truex is in second in the NASCAR standings and only behind his teammate of the number 11 Toyota Camry, Denny Hamlin. In fact, Hamlin has yet to win a race this season but still leads in the standings. The rest of the top 5 for Richmond will be Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, William Byron, and Kyle Larson. 3-time Defensive Player of the Year and 7-time Pro Bowler was accused of assaulting a man in a nightclub located in Pittsburgh last Sunday. However, according to Donald's lawyer, Casey White, Donald did not assault Spriggs and was actually protecting him and pulling people off of the pile where he was at. White stated on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh he actually saved Mr. Spriggs. From a defensive attorney's perspective, to be honest with you, Donald is from Pittsburgh and does most of his training in his hometown. He is currently in the middle of a 6-year extension that is worth $135 million. Police are still investigating and have not made any decisions yet. Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by John and Andy of the Outlap F1 podcast. How's it going, guys?
Good, real good, man. We got one race under our belt for this Formula One season, and if we have 22 more like the first one, we are set for an awesome season. So I think we are very, very fired up over here.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably one of the best starts of the season we've had in a long time. Things are, the stars look like they're aligning for a hell of a season, and we appreciate you having us on. Anytime we can talk F1 is a good thing for us. So. Generally speaking, we're texting about F1 23 hours a day. It feels like most days. So it's always good to get on and talk and spread the word of F1 for sure.
Yeah, I just started recently getting into Formula One. I was more of a NASCAR guy, but recently I kind of been checking it out. Really looks really fun, and especially with what happens, it's a lot quicker than NASCAR, so it's totally different. So, and I saw you guys' podcast, wanted to get you guys on. Of course, the first race was epic this season at Bahrain. What did you guys think of the performance that Lewis Hamilton was able to hold off Max Verstappen?
Two factors I think that led to it. One, incredible car control by Lewis in the closing laps. Basically, with about 3 laps to go, he has an off where it allowed Max to get really, really close, and then we all kind of saw that dive bomb move with 3 laps to go. Max has to go off the track in order to pull that off, so he was told immediately give the position back. And the other combination was whatever happened when he gave that position back, whether he had used up all of his tires, not necessarily really sure exactly what happened, but his pace fell off. And that allowed Lewis to basically get really super clinical with it and say, okay, I'm going to put this car in the most difficult position possible in order to have Max pull off another overtake. And Max was never able to do it. He was only able to get within a second in the last lap, and it just wasn't enough. So combination of Max kind of using up all his resources and incredible car control by one of the greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton, enabled him to take a race win in a car that probably wasn't the quickest.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Andy. I mean, certainly Mercedes really, honestly, for the first time in many years, had no business winning that race. They were absolutely not the fastest car on track. That was beyond a doubt Max Verstappen. From a strategy standpoint, from a pace standpoint, going all the way back to preseason testing, which coincidentally was actually at the same track as well. And for the first time in years, the guy leading in preseason testing was legitimately the one that everybody needed to worry about. Usually there's some sandbagging involved and not everybody's showing their pace. And, we only take preseason testing with a grain of salt. But this year, Red Bull looked strong from day one of preseason testing. They showed back up at that Bahrain race, and they looked, all weekend they looked dominant. To Andy's point, Lewis has an uncanny ability to of car control. He's aggressive as hell, but he's so clinical. You rarely ever see the guy make a mistake. Normally he's the one forcing guys into making a mistake. And just like in that example, with him and Max this week or that week, I don't think Max made a mistake necessarily, but Lewis put his car in such a place where there was no way that a pass was going to happen unless there was a collision or he went off track. Max Verstappen is probably one of the, he's a young gun. He's probably the most aggressive driver out there. So you've got, the both ends of the spectrum when it comes to clinical versus aggressiveness, one trying to pass the other. But both drivers were incredible. It put on one hell of a show. Throughout the race, strategy wise, one would take the lead, the other one would chase that guy down on fresher tires. The leader would pit, get fresher tires, and we just had that sequence of back and forth throughout the entire 56 laps. And I think Max, to your point, Andy, just used up a little bit of too much of his stuff trying to get up there. You know, the old saying is, it's one thing to catch a guy, it's another thing to pass him. And we saw that Sunday night for sure.
Talking about Red Bull, they recently have a new engine, or Honda has a new engine for them. I've heard a lot about that. Can you tell me more about the new engine for Red Bull?
So this is Honda's last year in the sport. So it's basically the same engine, but it's an evolution of what they've been doing. They came back into the sport in 2015, and let's be honest, they struggled. They had a partnership with the team that I support, McLaren, and it was painful. So they learned a lot very quickly about how to build and rebuild an engine after it would explode. So as they've gotten kind of their feet wet and they've got their feet under them, they slowly but surely have made substantial progress year after year after year. This last season that Honda's going to be in, they even last year, I would say they were kind of on par with all the other power unit manufacturers. And that was really the first time that you could really say that. This season, with this being Honda's last, they are bringing every upgrade that they've ever thought of to the table this season. So you're getting the most experimental Honda engine that they're probably ever going to come up with thrown into the back of those Red Bulls and the AlphaTauris this year. And they're going to see what happens. So if they think they can squeeze an ounce of performance out of it, they're going to do it. Because they're trying to, one, get the best rep that they can, and two, try to salvage what has been a very ugly chapter in their Formula One existence. So I think that's the way that they should have gone from the beginning, is kind of go, all the way in. But now that they've done it, I think it's going to be really interesting going forward for this season.
Yeah, for a team that has a very historic career, for lack of a better word, in Formula One, their time back in Formula One, to Andy's point, especially with McLaren, was really a black eye for McLaren, and certainly a black eye for Honda. And really, Japan as a whole, it was a disappointing thing. Honda is Japan, and Japan is Honda. And obviously, we go there every year. They have probably some of the most passionate fans on planet Earth, outside of maybe Ferrari. And, they live and breathe Formula One. They live and breathe racing. And it was tremendously a black eye. I'm also obviously a Mercedes guy, but I'm also a big McLaren guy. And it was painful to watch for quite a few years there. The big thing for them, obviously, Red Bull is kind of taking over that engine department, and we'll kind of foresee it moving forward. Likely, we think there's going to be a new engine deal in 2025, is kind of the rumor that everyone's put in play. And one of the big factors to kind of all this aligning was that Red Bull was able to convince both the FIA, which is the governing body of Formula One, and the other teams all synonymously agree that they would put an engine freeze in place, a development freeze. So typically speaking, every single year, every team is trying to bring the best and the best and the best and the best. And then after this, they're basically saying, all right, here's what you've got is what you've got until 2025. So I think obviously that was a huge win for Red Bull and AlphaTauri. It helps, Honda kind of wrap things up and put a bow on it for Red Bull to take off and kind of make their baby. But it's also good for the sport as well. I mean, we're talking about teams that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars every single year to get a tenth or two faster on the track. And so this kind of levels the playing field. We've got a lot of teams. We've got the big giants, the McLarens, the Mercedes, the Red Bulls, the Ferraris of the group. And then we've got, the American team like Haas, that's on the opposite end of the spectrum from a financial standpoint, and kind of, grabbing at pennies basically, and to make ends meet from race to race. So this kind of levels that playing field, which I think ultimately is going to be good for the sport moving forward. Hopefully bring everybody together on a pace standpoint.
There's another team that had a pretty good year last year, and they used to be Racing Point. Now they're Aston Martin. How well do you think they'll do this season?
I'm going to take a quote from Mr. T in Rocky 3, and I'm just going to say pain. It did not go well for Aston Martin at the first race. It did not go well for them in the test. They kind of backed into some really good performances last season by effectively, and they even came out and admitted it, they just said, you know what, we're going to look at the Mercedes car. We know that that's the dominant car, and we're just going to make a copy of it. And dare you to come and tell us that it's illegal because we don't think it is. And so they did that and it worked. But now they've changed the rules so that you can't exactly do what they did before. And now they've had to go off on their own and they're struggling a little bit. So I don't know that they're going to be able to repeat their performances of last year this season. What is interesting, however, for that team in 2022 is everything gets reset. Now they are well funded. Now they have backing by Lawrence Stroll. And they've basically kind of got all their ducks in a row. So I do think while this season may be a struggle for them, I think that's where the power base is moving into that team moving forward. And they're going to be something to deal with in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, they kind of threw all their eggs into one basket last year, with the copying of Mercedes. And for the most part, it worked out pretty well. But historically speaking, going back to even before their Racing Point, when they were called Force India, that's always been a relatively low budget team. I'd say kind of middle of the ground. They've always hit above their weight class. They've achieved more than they probably on paper ever should have. And so I'm hopeful, and I think certainly Andy is, and I think everyone of F1 really is hopeful that now that they've got some legitimate funding, I think they're going to hit the reset button this year, knowing that the cars are going to be basically from ground up are going to be completely different next year. I think they're likely going to try to say, all right, let's put a Band-Aid on this year, get through it, and put all of our money, all of our development into the upcoming year. So unfortunately, I agree with Andy. I think they're going to struggle on track this year, unfortunately. But let's not kid ourselves. Having Aston Martin in Formula One is a damn good thing for the sport. Obviously it's one of the most recognizable brands out there. They've got such a phenomenal history in racing, not necessarily in Formula One, but across many forms of racing. So it's good to see a green car back on track.
Yeah, you mentioned everything gets reset. I'm not too familiar with that. Could you explain more like how everything gets reset and stuff like that?
Sure. So every few years they literally change. It's called Formula One because it's literally a racing formula that is designed to be the fastest in the world. So that's where you get Formula and One, and that's how it comes together. So what they do every few years is they literally will change the racing formula. And in 2022, it was supposed to happen in 2021. COVID happened, and then that pushed everything back. But 2022 is supposed to be probably the biggest set of formulaic changes to the cars that has happened in maybe the last 10 or 15 years. So next year's cars are going to look completely different than they do now. They're going to work completely different than they do now. The engines are going to be different than what is in there now, and the tires are going to be different than what's in there now. So if you're liking what you see this year, enjoy it, because it may not come again for a while, in terms of at least how the cars look and the aesthetic and everything. So yeah, next year it's all going to reset. Everybody's and nobody's done this before. The teams actually got together and set some actually reasonable ground rules, and it's the first time in forever that I could ever remember as a fan that they've actually done this. So it promotes competition. It promotes a smaller team being able to punch above its weight. It promotes the bigger teams still necessarily having the resources to do well, but they have to get it right. So it's going to be very much a designer's formula next year. It's going to be an engineering formula next year. And we're going to see who's going to be able to come out on top. For the last 10 years or so, it's been Mercedes. It could be any one of the 9 teams or 10 teams that are in Formula One next year that get it right off the bat, and it could have a great year. So it's going to be really, really fun. And it's really interesting.
Yeah, and the whole purpose of kind of moving to a new design, to Andy's point, was to improve the on-track action. So we want teams closer together. We really ideally don't want one dominant team. Certainly if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan like me, it's been a nice run. But the bigger F1 fan in me wants to see that, like we saw at Bahrain, guys within a second of each other, wheel-to-wheel action on a week-to-week basis. We don't want to see a dominant team. We want to see a nice battle throughout 23 races, a title, hopefully going down to the last race like we saw, in 2008 on the last lap of the last race, we see a title decided on that. That's what we want to see. That's the formula hopefully we see moving forward. But so yeah, the cars are being redesigned to make them easier to overtake, to race close together in packs, and certainly won't be easy to drive. There's a reason why these are the best drivers in the world. These things are going to be absolute monsters to drive, but it should, at least on paper and everything that we've seen from aero standpoint, from the wind tunnels and everything else, it should allow these cars to really race in packs, and put on a phenomenal show for the fans. So yeah, everything's being reset from the ground up. The pecking order may shift dramatically when it comes to 2022. I know we're all looking forward to it. And the cars, I certainly encourage you to go Google, 2022 Formula One cars. They look phenomenal. They look like, one of the big thing is they wanted a car that people would be proud, a kid would be proud to put up on a poster on a wall and say, wow, that's a beautiful machine. And I think they certainly have achieved that. So yeah, we're in good hands, I think, for the future here in Formula One.
That makes a lot more sense. You want to make it more competitive, because I know Lewis Hamilton has been dominating the last 3 or 4 years, and I think you mentioned in 2022 they're getting a new version of the car, a new version, like a new F1 car. I think NASCAR is doing something like that as well. So
yep.
That's really intriguing, and definitely think that's going to make it more exciting, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, across all the forms. Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I was going to say
across all the forms of racing that we see in the States, it comes to NASCAR, IndyCar, World Endurance Championship, IMSA, which is also endurance racing, and certainly Formula One. They are all basically in the next 2 to 3 years are shifting to new cars, which should bring in hopefully a lot more manufacturers, which would be more teams, and certainly tighten up the competition. So I think if you're an American racing fan, and even if you're just now hopping on board like yourself, you're getting on the train at a good time, because in the world of racing, the things are probably as bright as they've been in decades. So
yeah, that makes a lot more sense. That makes it more competitive, and I can't wait for next year. And of course, this year you still got 22 more races to go, so it's going to be a fun year. So, do you have any predictions for the next race?
Interesting. I'm going to say probably hopefully more of the same, where I think you're going to have a really good fight between the top 2 teams, and that would be Red Bull and Mercedes. And then you get into, if you're going down the rest of the grid, this incredible fight between potentially the next 7 teams for who's kind of the best of the rest. Right now it's McLaren. The next race, it could be Ferrari, it could be AlphaTauri, it could be Aston Martin could show up with some sort of upgrade package and fix their woes. Everybody seems to be bringing the upgrades that they normally would reserve until maybe the middle of the season now. Basically because they want to kind of sign off on them, get them on the car, see if they work, and then try to move everything to 22. So you're going to see really quickly how these cars are developed, and you're going to have, I think, 2 huge fights, one for P1 and 2, and one for that third place in the Constructors' Championship. So basically anywhere from 1 to 10, we don't know what's going to happen, and that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, going back and watching last year's race at this track, which I was actually doing this week in preparation for our podcast coming up, we had a hell of a good battle throughout the entire race. Unfortunately, it was cut short, a little bit short, because Max Verstappen had a mechanical issue, caused, I think, a right rear tire to blow, which put him into the sand, and that kind of killed that battle. But throughout that race, he and Lewis Hamilton were going neck and neck, exactly what we saw, at Bahrain. Certainly, Hamilton's teammate Valtteri Bottas was kind of in the mix as well. This is a very old school track. It's narrow. It's hard to pass. You really got to kind of send it. As the great Daniel Ricciardo would say, you got to lick the stamp and send it. If you're new to F1 and you're looking for a driver to support, Daniel Ricciardo is a good one to have. He just moved over to McLaren, so I know Andy is very happy to have him in Papaya Orange over there. But you're going to have to take some aggressive moves. You're going to have to take some chances that you may not normally have to take in a modern track, because of the fact that it is so skinny and it's nothing but sand around it. You really don't have a lot of room for error. But I think, looking back at that race, I would not be shocked in the least bit if Max Verstappen wins this race. But I think we're going to have, I think all 4 drivers from the top 2 teams I think are very well going to be in the mix. It's all going to come down to, I think, strategy, who's going to make the right pit call, or the right pit stops at the right time. I think a little bit of luck could probably go a long way. We may see some carnage at the back. We certainly saw some of that last year. Again, with it being a difficult track to pass, we're probably going to see some contact. And when that contact happens, could really change the strategy of the whole race. So I think it's going to be whoever's in the right place, the right time. But yeah, don't be shocked if a Red Bull wins this race for sure.
Yeah, you just mentioned Daniel Ricciardo, and I've heard him a few times. He's a pretty good driver. How well do you think he'll do with his new team?
Andy, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, I'm hoping the sky's the limit. I mean, they went after him a couple years ago, and he said no because he thought that the car wasn't there yet. He's now been kind of brought over, and he left which was a team in Renault, and now they're Alpine, that had kind of carved out a really comfortable niche for him. So now he's moving over to McLaren, basically where I think he kind of wanted to go, but he had to wait for the car to get good again. And now the car looks really good again. They've reunited with Mercedes as they've gone around from, 6 years ago, they were McLaren Mercedes, then they were McLaren Honda, then they were McLaren Renault. Now they're back to being McLaren Mercedes again. So that's all come full circle. And it looks like that they've hit this season hit the ground running this season for the first time in a long time that I can remember. I mean, I have nightmares of certain test sessions where, if they got 5 laps on the board, you were like, hey, at least that's something. So they've gone through a really, really tough stretch, but he's coming into the team at a really good time. And the hope is that the sky is the limit, that the two drivers that they have in Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris are going to feed off each other, and they're going to compete with each other enough to hopefully bridge that gap to get to the top 2 teams, to hopefully by the end of this, maybe even by the end of the season, fighting with Red Bull, fighting maybe even with Mercedes. Might be a bit of a stretch, but as a fan, hey, I got to hope.
Yeah, if Daniel Ricciardo is the kind of driver that if the car is right and working well and doing what it's supposed to do, I mean, he's a multi-race winner. There's no reason that he shouldn't be in the mix. There's no reason that he couldn't be a future world champion. Again, if the machinery will do what it's supposed to do. If they give him a car that he can actually be racy with, again, he takes chances. He's one of the best overtakers on the grid, especially if the car is doing what it should be doing and he has confidence in that car. If they get him that confidence, the sky is the limit for him. So yeah, he's a fun one to watch. I don't think I've ever seen the guy without a smile on his face. Like I said, if you're a new fan, you're looking for someone to get behind and support. I mean, you can't go wrong with the guy. He's got one of the best personalities out there. He's a fan favorite, and he's got the on track, performance to back it up as well.
And when he comes to America, he loves it. He basically adopted Austin, Texas as his second home. He goes all in with the local football team down there, the Longhorns. So he's one to get behind if you're a new fan and you're looking for a personality to go, I wonder who I should root for. He's a good one.
Yeah, he grew up as a kid, even though he's Australian. He grew up watching Dale Earnhardt Sr. in NASCAR. That's why he chose the number 3. He actually has a bet right now with the head of McLaren, Zach Brown, that if he gets a podium this year, he'll actually get to race the old number 3 Wrangler car from Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s. A few hot laps on that. So they've got a nice little bet going there. Not like Daniel Ricciardo needed any more motivation, but I think Dale Earnhardt Sr. is an icon to him, as it was to so many racing fans out there. So he's got just a little bit of extra chip now to go for it. He's when he goes to Austin, Texas, a couple of years ago, he painted his helmet to look exactly like the Texas Longhorns football helmets. It was probably one of the coolest helmets I've ever seen. He's had his race suit redesigned a couple of years to look like he's got cowboy boots on. So he loves America, and American fans certainly love him as well. So he's a good one to support.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the first time I heard of Daniel Ricciardo was when Chase Elliott won the NASCAR Cup in October of last year, and he mentioned that Daniel Ricciardo congratulated him. So I think they're friends there. So that was the first time I actually heard of Daniel Ricciardo, but that's pretty cool, and I'll definitely check him out the next race.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was actually checking out the race schedule this year, and it seems like it's pretty spaced out. Is it normally like that, or is it just because of, COVID and they have to quarantine after going to different countries?
I mean, it's interesting that from an outside perspective, you're saying it's spaced out. From an F1's fan's perspective, this thing is like super compressed. The norm is sometimes even maybe 5-6 years ago, there were maybe only 17 or 18 or 19 races in a year. This year we have 23. They've never done that before. So it's going to be a much larger strain on logistics. And the reason that they're spaced out is because you literally have to pack up the entire circus at the end of every Grand Prix. Literally, the checkered flag falls and the crews start working on tearing everything down, even while they're celebrating. They're celebrating and they're tearing stuff down. Why? Because they got to pack it all up and they got to move it to another country, to another part of the world. When they're in Europe, they can be a little closer together because it's not necessarily as far, but they have a stretch where they go this is how it's scheduled. They go from Monaco, which is in Europe, to Canada, and then back into Europe again for a huge chunk of the season. So all of that logistics has to happen, and it all has to happen kind of on time. Otherwise, these guys, you may get a car with missing a wheel. That's a problem. So because of that, they have to give these guys some time in order to get from place to place to place. But this season with 23 races, yeah, these teams are going to be feeling it a lot more than they have necessarily in the past, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about putting, thousands of pounds worth of machinery onto cargo planes, cargo ships. Obviously, they've got, people, men and women that, this is all they do is just plan logistically speaking. It's they keep, think of, UPS doing what they do. They've got the same equivalent for Formula One, thinking a month in advance. I'm sure that they've already got, some equipment, on its way to Russia or wherever the case may be, just to try to get things on the way. I mean, we're talking about a sport that's going through, 4 or 5 different continents. And to Andy's point, crossing the pond several times throughout the year. It's going to be a wild season. Normally, in a typical season, we might have a week off between races, give or take like that. We've got this weird stretch right now. Traditionally speaking, the first race of the year would start in Australia at Melbourne. Because of COVID, it's a street course, so they kind of really have to set everything up on, everyday race or everyday streets that people use. So logistically, that's a nightmare, especially if you're not 100% sure that you're going to be able to have fans or not. So they've actually moved that race towards the end of the season in hopes that they'll have a good amount of fans in person. And so we've started the season a little bit later, but we're also finishing a little bit later. But everything is just compacted. So normally we'd already be 2 races into the season before we had this kind of weird gap here. But yeah, it's going to be, even from a podcasting standpoint, we joke around, like, make sure we get our throat lozenges together, make sure we get our water bottles, protect your voice, because, we typically do 2 episodes for every single race, preview and a review. And, right there, we've got 46 episodes, in a 52-week year. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of other things along the way. So we joke about the struggles that we have, and it's nothing compared to what the men and women in F1 are going to have to go through. They're not going to see much of their families this year, unfortunately. But true. If there's one sport or one profession that I think people would be willing to do that for, it's certainly F1 is one that they're willing to make that sacrifice for.
Yeah, that's interesting because, I'm used to, I guess, back to like week after week, but I guess, football in different countries going back and forth. So I didn't even realize that. So that's intriguing, and that makes it, I guess, more exciting. So do you guys have any predictions on who wins the next race?
Yeah, for me, like I said, I think it's, if I'm a betting man, I've got to put my money on Max Verstappen. We did our season preview episode or prediction episode, and certainly I think we're going to get some wrong, as we typically do, and we'll have a lot of crap talking between hosts throughout the year based on some of our predictions. But I predicted Lewis Hamilton to win his 8th championship, but I've also predicted Red Bull to take the Constructors' Championship for the first time since Andy, 2012, 2013. Yeah. So I think, again, I think ultimately speaking, Red Bull finally have two drivers that look like they will be contending week after week after week. Max Verstappen has always been their team leader, but they've got, the phenom, I call him the silent assassin, Checo, Sergio Perez, from Mexico. He's part of the Red Bull group now. He's a F1 veteran. The guy, he doesn't always qualify well on Saturdays, but on Sundays, he, sometimes you look at the tables, after the race, and the guy is, you're like, he's P4, he's in like, he started 12th. Like, how does that even happen in Formula One? Sometimes you don't even see much of it on the broadcast, but he's just making moves left and right. And that's kind of why I call him the silent assassin. He finds a way week after week after week to show up. Even in Bahrain, he was technically last twice because the car stalled out and actually turned off on the formation, the pace lap leading up to the race. He had to literally reboot the car, kind of like a Control-Alt-Delete for a Formula One style. And because of that, he had to start the race from pit lane, and then finishing, fifth place, I think, Andy. So, I mean, the guy is incredible. And if they've got two drivers that can do that week after week, Mercedes could be in for some hurt. So, but for the next race, I've got to put my money on Max Verstappen. I think this track, Red Bull has always been a handling car. They haven't always had the best horsepower, but they've always been able to handle well. And now that they've got horsepower to match handling, I think this track is going to suit them very well.
So for the next race coming up, I think it may be a Red Bull 1-2. And I think also, if you're a new fan coming into it, watch the qualifying session on Saturday morning if you can, because this track may not race the best, because as we talked about earlier, it's kind of it's really difficult to actually pull a pass off because the cars are very wide and the track is very thin. But the qualifying is going to be kind of everybody kind of putting their cards on the table. What do we really have? And now we're going to somewhere other than Bahrain for the first time in these cars. So now we're really going to get the chance to see, are the problems that Mercedes were having, are they track specific or are they car specific? Well, we don't really know. Is Red Bull really that dominant, or were they really just that dominant at Bahrain? We didn't really know yet. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating weekend coming up. I'm so looking forward to it because, again, like I said, for the first time in a long time, we're going into a Formula One weekend where we don't know what's going to happen, and that's awesome.
Before we end the interview, do you guys want to talk more about your podcast?
Yeah, so we're an American-based podcast. We've all of us started out of Chicago. We've two out of the four of us have kind of spread out to different things. One being myself in North Carolina. We have one up on our way up to New York, New Jersey area. But Chicago is still, always going to be the home base location. But we're entering our third season in F1. We've got a wide variety of experience. And myself and Andy have been watching F1 for multiple decades now. Our other two hosts are newer fans, but equally as passionate as we are. So we have a really nice mix of experience of old school, new school. We pretty much all support different teams, so we have a lot of good rivalries from a week-to-week basis. You can find us literally on basically any podcasting app. And, we give our predictions and we have a good time with it. And then, on Sunday nights, we do a deep dive review into the race. We go through driver by driver, really talk about their weekends. We've got kind of all the stats to back it up. And we do that on Sunday night to, make sure that by Monday morning, when you're heading into work or you're, walking to your living room right now during COVID to turn on your laptop, you've got your podcast ready for you, waiting on you on Sunday or on Monday morning. But yeah, we have a really good time. We talk a lot of smack with each other. I think we've got a really nice comical mix between the four of us. And if you're a lot of our listeners are international, but we've seen such a growth on the American side. You're an American fan, you're just getting into the sport. We actually have an episode out there, an F1 for beginners, that we update every single year with the newest drivers, the latest, kind of facts about the cars. We really break it down for a brand new fan who just happened to watch, Drive to Survive on Netflix and is like, what is Formula One? We break it down to that level and allow the casual fan to kind of catch up and really understand what's going on. So yeah, I think we've got a nice mix that we bring in. You can find, we got a website, www.outlapf1.com. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at OutlapF1 Podcast. We have a Discord channel. So if someone out there just wants to learn about F1 and kind of build an F1 community, that's a place to go. So definitely check out our link tree on Twitter. Andy, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, and we always really encourage young fans, old fans, new fans, old fans, whoever, to interact with us. Send us questions. There is no such thing as a stupid question. We've gone everywhere from what do the three, why do the drivers only have 3 letters in their names on the scoring thing, on the right-hand side of the screen, to all sorts of different questions. And we get into sometimes tire mechanics. Last year we had this big controversy about brake ducts. So we had to get into all sorts of technical research about what makes a brake duct and why is it right and why is this one wrong. But it's great. John and James were the founders of this thing. They brought me in last year. Then we met Deanna on Twitter. We brought her in for this year. So I think it's just all 4 of us, I think, are really, as John mentioned, it's an awesome dynamic that we've got going on. And like I said, we also encourage, the more people want to interact with us, the better. We love talking about this sport. It's a Thursday night and we're talking about it because we love to do it. So yeah. However you want to interact with us is totally cool with us.
All right. Thanks, guys, for joining, and can't wait for the next race.
Yeah, I appreciate having us on. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it.
Alrighty, breaking news. LaMarcus Aldridge has retired after 15 seasons. How shocked are you by that, Michael?
I was actually pretty shocked. I mean, it kind of happened unexpected. And I thought, he's still, he's up there in age, but he's still got like a couple of years left. I thought.
Well, I know he supposedly had a heart problem, and that was really big, but he had just signed with the Nets, and I think he had his really first chance. Well, I guess with the Spurs, he had a few years where they could have won a championship, but I thought those last few seasons in San Antonio, they just didn't really have much of a chance, and they were just mediocre. But I think this is kind of his first time that he had since, 2015, 2016, that he had a chance to win a championship. So it's kind of disappointing because unless the Nets give him one or he joins an assistant coach, there's no way he's going to win a championship, which I think might hurt his Hall of Fame career. Speaking of Hall of Fame, do you think LaMarcus Aldridge is a Hall of Famer, Michael?
I don't personally think so. I think he's a really good player, for sure. And I definitely think he's up there, but I just think that there's a lot of good NBA players, especially like this upcoming generation that there's just so many good players that I think deserve it more than him.
Yeah, how LaMarcus Aldridge was great or was good, but I don't know if he was ever great. And I think, like I said, as you pointed out, it's the Hall of Fame, not the Hall of Good, which I think LaMarcus Aldridge is one of the greatest Portland Trailblazers of all time, outside of Clyde Drexler and Damian Lillard and Bill Walton. And I think he probably will go in the Spurs Hall of Fame, I think. But I think overall he probably won't reach the fame because he just didn't do quite enough. He did get 7 or 8 All-Star game or appearances. He made a few All-NBA teams. But I think, as you previously mentioned, he just wasn't quite that next step. And I think, and of course, not winning a championship might hurt it a little bit. But we'll see what ends up happening. Maybe he comes back surprisingly and wins a championship. I personally think if the Nets do end up winning the championship this year, that they'll probably give a ring to him, just because he was with the team during the season at some point. So we'll see what ends up happening. Again, I put that on our poll question on Friday to say, was LaMarcus Aldridge a Hall of Famer? And a lot of people said yes. So I was a little shocked about that. But very good player, disappointed. We'll see what ends up happening. How far do you think the Nets will go this? Do you think the Nets are going to make the championship this year, Michael?
I think with the way the AFC not the AFC East, the NBA East is doing, I think they're pretty much no competition. So yeah, I think they'll make the championship.
I think so too. The Sixers and Bucks are their biggest threat, and I think the Sixers are better than people want to give them credit for. But at the same time, they just don't have enough, and they don't have really that scorer that they can go to. Yeah, they have Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, but they don't necessarily have a guy that can win them games against a team like the Nets. But the Nets are so good right now, even without LaMarcus Aldridge. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. They added Blake Griffin. They got Joe Harris. They're so good. They're pretty much stacked every position. And plus, they have two other coaches outside of Steve Nash that could be head coaches, like Mike D'Antoni and Jack Vaughn. So they just have so much on that team. Let's go back to the LaMarcus Aldridge topic a little bit. Do you think without LaMarcus Aldridge, the Nets will really feel anything? Do you think they'll struggle a little bit now that Aldridge is gone?
I personally don't think so, just because they are still really good. They got a lot of support players. As long as uh Kyrie, Harden, and KD can all stay healthy, I think this team could definitely make it to the championship. And I mean, Aldridge definitely helped them, but I think they're still going to be good regardless, just because they're so stacked.
Yeah, I mean, it's just gonna be hard for any team to beat the Nets. I mean, even without LaMarcus Aldridge, like he was coming off the bench, and I feel like he was getting a really good. He was starting to get really familiar with his teammates, and now that he's no longer there, that's gonna. I think not gonna really hurt him, but I think it's just kind of sad to see how LaMarcus Aldridge, right when he's getting to know his team, and right when he has a chance to win his first championship, he has to retire because of health problems. It's really disappointing, and it's just disappointing to see because I feel like LaMarcus Aldridge could have won at least one or two NBA championships. All right, now that Julian Edelman is retired, where do you think he ranks above the all-time receivers?
I think he is definitely up there. Probably he's definitely in the top 100. I think maybe even top 50. I don't think he's like top. He's definitely not top 10 or like top 25, but I think he's somewhere between like 50 and 25.
I don't know if I'd put him even in the top 50, to be honest with you, because there's so many good receivers out there. And you previously mentioned that Julian Edelman, it was kind of a system receiver. Do you think if he didn't have Tom Brady or Bill Belichick, he wouldn't have been the same and probably wouldn't have won a Super Bowl MVP? What's your thoughts on that?
I personally, like I said, I think with Belichick, and Brady, I think they pretty much made him the player that he is. I'm not saying he wouldn't have been good on another team, but I don't think he would have been nearly the same player if he went to like another team. So
Yeah, I mean, like if he went to like the Bengals or went to the Lions, well, maybe if he went to the Lions, he would have had success because they would have had Matt Stafford. But like if he went to the Bengals, the Browns, or even a team like the Texans, or I mean, even a team like the Giants, he probably wouldn't have had that same success. But I think, as you mentioned, if he doesn't have Tom Brady or Bill Belichick, he's just not the same type of receiver. And yeah, he won 3 Super Bowls, he won a Super Bowl MVP, but there's not enough evidence. There's just not enough evidence for Julian Edelman to be a Hall of Famer. Do you think a guy like Reggie Wayne? Do you think Reggie Wayne was better than Julian Edelman?
I think so. Yeah, I think overall Erjemaine was just a better receiver. I mean, he put up better stats, I believe, and he also did less. He didn't have the same like system. I mean, yeah, he had Peyton Manning, but Peyton Manning, I still don't think he's up there with Tom Brady, but I don't think he is a Tom Brady. And I think the coaching was also not as good as Belichick. So
No, and I don't think so either. But I mean, if you look down the list, like Hines Ward, there was a bunch of other receivers that just deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. So we'll see what happens with Julian Edelman. It's kind of sad what happened though, because I think he failed his physical, and the Patriots were going to release him until he decided to retire. What do you think about that? Did you hear that, or did you see that report that he failed his physical?
I believe I saw something about that, and I was a little bit shocked by it. So
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, yeah, because it is a little shocking because on Monday, I think, is when he announced his retirement. And then it came out on Wednesday that it was reported that he failed his physical. And because of that, the Patriots decided to release him. And I think he retired before anybody could get that news. So it made him look like that he actually retired and he left in his own terms. But, Julian Edelman, very successful career. I just don't think he reached the status of a Hall of Famer. Definitely Patriots Hall of Famer. Definitely Kent State Hall of Famer, but at the end of the day, he just didn't do enough to get that gold jacket. Sam Darnold is headed to Carolina. I know that happened last week, but we weren't really able to talk about it much. How well do you think he does with the Panthers?
I think Sam Darnold's actually not a bad quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback. I just think the Jets wasted his potential. So I think now that he actually has a somewhat of a supporting cast, he'll actually do a lot better. But I still, like I said, I don't think he's going to be like take the Panthers to the next level. But I think he's going to at least have a better year than he would with the Jets.
Well, I mean, you said he had a better supporting staff. I think he does, but at the same time, I don't think he does. Like I know he definitely gets an upgrade after leaving the Jets because that's where everybody goes to die. But he's going to Carolina, and they don't have much of a supporting cast either. Yeah, they have Christian McCaffrey, but he missed 13 games last season. I mean, DJ Moore is a mediocre receiver. Robbie Anderson's not that bad. The offensive line's not great. The defense can't stop anybody. I just don't know if he gets much of an upgrade going to Carolina. I think he would have been so much better if he went to San Francisco or even a place like, Denver. I think he would have had a better option. But I just don't think he has. I don't think he goes from a terrible situation to a bad situation, in my opinion, because the Panthers, again, don't have a lot outside of McCaffrey. And if McCaffrey gets hurt again, I mean, Teddy Bridgewater was a good quarterback, but he struggled because there's really nobody that the Panthers have outside of Robbie Anderson when Christian McCaffrey goes down. So I'm a little worried about that. Speaking of San Francisco, they were willing to give a first-round pick to Sam Darnold per reports. Now, there's been multiple reports that say that's either true or not true. Do you think Sam Darnold would have been better in San Francisco?
I think the biggest problem that he faces is he needs to have a good support system. I think that really impacts his play, kind of like Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton's not necessarily a bad quarterback, but his play really depends on how good his receivers are and his offensive line. Because you saw with him back when they had like AJ Green healthy and good running backs and good receivers, he did really good. But once that supporting system went away, he didn't do so good. So yeah, I think it's the same situation with Sam Darnold.
Well, I mean, imagine if he would have went to the Niners. I mean, he would have been. I mean, they probably would have traded Jimmy Garoppolo, or maybe they would have kept Darnold as a backup to Garoppolo just in case he didn't do well. But I mean, that would have been crazy, in my opinion, if Sam Darnold would have went to San Francisco, because I think he would have been in a better situation because they have George Kittle, who's the second best tight end in the league. They have a solid running game. Kyle Shanahan's a great coach. I think Darnold would have been a lot more successful there, and I guess we'll never know because now he's with the Panthers and he's there for at least this year or next year. Did you by chance see Sam Darnold's press conference?
No, I did not.
All right, here is Sam Darnold's press conference right here.
Hey, Sam, this is Nick Carboni. I'm with the NBC affiliate here in Charlotte. As you get a little chance to reflect, how would you sum up your 3 years in New York? And what was your reaction when you found out you were being traded to Carolina?
Yeah. So, obviously getting drafted as high as I did, my expectations were to go in there, play 20 years and, win Super Bowls. And, that was the dream going in there. And, but obviously it didn't work out. And so, but I'm thankful and, just thankful for the opportunity that, that organization gave me, for the 3 years that I was with them. But now, coming in as a Carolina Panther, I'm very excited for this opportunity and, just to, come in, with a fresh start and, just excited to get going.
Let's go to Josh Klein.
Hey, Sam. What lessons did you learn from your first 3 years in the league? And then also, completely separate question, how excited are you to play with Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore and the rest of the weapons here in Charlotte?
Yeah. So, I learned a ton, good and bad, in New York. I think there's stuff that you can take away, from both aspects. I think, just, what I learned throughout my 3 years being a pro, you learn so much more, as years go on, just with experience. And I'm going to take that with me forever. And then in terms of the weapons, I'm really excited to, play with these guys here. And obviously I have some experience playing with Robbie Anderson. So super excited to continue that relationship and continue to play with him. And then, obviously there's a lot of other guys as well. So very excited about the opportunity to play here and just play with, guys like Christian, DJ, David Moore, Dan Arnold, just to name a few.
Jonathan Alexander.
Hey, Sam, hope all is well. I'm just curious, why do you think that you could be successful in this particular offense and with the new start with the Panthers?
Yeah, I think, first of all, this organization, just the attention to detail with the culture here is one of a kind. And I think, starting with Mr. Tepper, and then, Mr. Fitter, and then, obviously Coach Rule, being able to come in here and be on the same wavelength in terms of what the culture needs to be, and, spreading that throughout the organization. And then in terms of the offense, haven't talked to Joe a ton about it. I mean, obviously I'm just, fresh off, getting traded, and been, talking to him now for a few days. So, it's exciting stuff. I know what the offense is capable of, and just excited to hit the ground running.
Well, do you think Sam Darnold will do in his first season in Carolina?
I think he does okay. I don't think he does great. Like I said, I think you mentioned earlier that the Panthers still aren't great. I do think they're better than the Jets, though. So I think he does slightly better than he will with the Jets, but not much.
What do you have on there, or what do you project? How many games do they win this season?
I would say maybe 5 or 6.
In my opinion, I think they went 5-11 last year, and this year there's now 17 games, so I could see them going 6-11 again. But if McCaffrey's not healthy, then I don't see them winning more games, maybe one more game, because again, there's 17 games this season. But imagine now, it's McCaffrey's got to be healthy, in my opinion. The Panthers need to do something. Like if Devontae Smith is still on the board at number 8, then they should draft him, because actually in my recent mock draft you can check that on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, I actually have Devontae Smith going number 8 to Carolina. We'll see what ends up happening there. But in my opinion, I think he fits, I think they win 6 games, but again, they need a guy like Devontae Smith in order to help the receivers game, because DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson is not going to do it. They also lost Curtis Samuel to Washington. Ian Thomas has been a very underwhelming tight end. Maybe they get Kyle Pitts if he's still available, but I think Devontae Smith fits them the most. In your mock draft, Michael, who do you have the Panthers taking?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe I had them taking an offensive lineman, because I think I had Devontae Smith already gone at that point. So,
was it Penny Sewell by chance?
No, I had Penny Sewell going to the Bengals. It was I think Rashad Benton.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard much about him, because I think it was the guy out of USC that was the second best tackle. But there's also, I think, the Ohio State guard Wyatt Davis that's been solid. But yeah, the Panthers, they need so much help on that offensive line. I mean, Russell Okung only played 7 games last year. I mean, we'll see what ends up happening with him, but it looks like that he could be out of Carolina once his contract is over. But do you have anything else to add about Sam Darnold, Michael?
No.
Okay. Let's switch gears over to now that the Panthers made a move for Sam Darnold, it looks like Teddy Bridgewater's out the door. There's been a lot of reports that there's been some teams interested that include the Niners, the Broncos, the Saints, the Vikings, and even even the Bears have shown interest. Where do you think Teddy Bridgewater ends up now that the Panthers draft or traded for Sam Darnold?
I think he could be a good bridge quarterback for Chicago. I think that'd probably be the best fit for him.
Well, they'd have to figure out how to get rid of Nick Foles. Now, they'll keep Andy Dalton, and they're probably not going to draft a quarterback with the 20th overall pick, because most likely not a lot of quarterbacks are going to be available by the time the Panthers get it, or by the time the Bears select. But I think, they'd have to likely release Nick Foles, and they would have to eat up that contract. And I think they're still afraid of that. So I think they want to keep Nick Foles for at least one more year. In my opinion, I like Teddy Bridgewater a lot, so I don't want him to go to the Bears. I could see him going to Denver. Now, that's not much of an upgrade, I guess, in terms of quarterbacks, but they have a lot of options there. They got Melvin Gordon and Royce Freeman. They got a great receiving core in Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton. That would seem like a great option. Now, the defense, I'm not sure how good they're going to be next year now that Von Miller is getting older. Bradley Chubb needs to stay healthy. But I would imagine that Denver makes the most sense. Do you think there's another sleeper team that could make the move for Bridgewater?
Let me think for a second. I don't think so. Maybe the Eagles. I can see the Eagles.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't even think about them. Yeah, they only have Jalen Hurts, Carson Wentz anymore. I'm not sure the Eagles are necessarily sold on Jalen Hurts, but they did trade down, so it looks like they're not going to necessarily take a quarterback. But I did not think about the Eagles. That's a good one. In my opinion, the Saints could be a sleeper team. I mean, they would make the move. I'm not sure the Panthers would want to trade Bridgewater back to the Saints, but I could see a scenario where somehow they would release Bridgewater and he'd go back to New Orleans. Because in my opinion, Taysom Hill, yeah, he got that big contract. Jameis Winston re-signed, but I still think they're in need of a quarterback now that Drew Brees retired. And Teddy Bridgewater did an excellent job in New Orleans. He was 5-0, 9 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. New Orleans would make a lot of sense. He could go back to Minnesota, but again, he would have to be the backup under Cousins, and I'm not sure they would want to pay $21 million a year for a backup quarterback. Do you think what team or I should why do you think Teddy Bridgewater struggled in Carolina, Michael?
Supporting cast is the biggest thing.
Yeah, I mean McCaffrey only plays 3 games. I've been mentioning that a lot, but yeah, you can't play 3 games, or you can't miss 13 games and expect Bridgewater to be the same. Yeah, DJ Moore was not great. Robbie Anderson was pretty decent. Ian Thomas was underwhelming. I mean, that offensive line was, I would say, was not good to say the least. I mean, that secondary was bad. Do you think Joe Brady isn't as good as an offensive coordinator as people have said that he is?
No, I personally don't think he's that great of an offense coordinator.
Do you think Joe Brady would fit, or do you think Joe Brady is the coach for the Bengals next year if things don't work out in Cincinnati with Zach Taylor?
I hope not.
So you don't, even though Joe Brady had a lot of success with Joe Burrow, you don't think that would be a great match?
Well, the thing is, not necessarily. I think he has success with Joe Burrow, but I don't think he's necessarily the greatest coach out there. That's my biggest concern.
Well, I mean, Joe Brady last year won 5 games as an offensive coordinator, and there was multiple teams interested in him. So it's a little intriguing to see what happens, because even if they don't have a good season this year, I expect him to possibly get more interviews. And I think he would be the best fit with the Bengals. But at the same time, I don't think he's as good as a coach as people say. And maybe just because he was with Joe Burrow. But again, Joe Burrow was really nothing before Joe Brady. But time will tell, and we'll see what happens to the young offensive coordinator. Okay, so the NFL draft is less than 2 weeks away. Right now, do you think the Jets should take Zach Wilson at number 2?
Yeah, I think they definitely need to get a quarterback, and I think Zach Wilson is still a pretty. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is by far the best quarterback. I think Zach Wilson's also pretty good, so I think that's pretty much the move.
Do you think Justin Fields, it looks like he's slipping in a lot of places. Some people said that he shouldn't be a top 10 pick. Now, some others are saying differently. But do you think he'll go in the top 10? And where do you think Justin Fields should land?
I could see if a bunch of quarterbacks going early. I think Mac Jones goes third to the Niners. If other teams start trading up for the North Dakota State quarterback, can't remember his name. I think there's probably going to be a team that drafts him if all the other quarterbacks go early. But it's kind of like Lamar Jackson a couple years ago. He could go in the top 5, or he could go late first round, maybe even second.
Yeah, you previously just mentioned Trey Lance from North Dakota State. I had him going to Washington at number 7 in my recent mock draft. I believe I have Lawrence Wilson and Mac Jones going top 3. And then I think I have the Cowboys making the move for Kyle Pitts. But in my opinion, I think Justin Fields is the 3rd best quarterback in this draft. Justin Fields should be in the top 5, but I think he's going to fall. And I think the Patriots could take him at 15. However, I think there's a good possible chance that he falls all the way to number 24 or number 23 to the Steelers, which would be shocking if the Steelers were to grab Justin Fields. Kellen Mond's another quarterback that I think that could come out of nowhere at Texas A&M, but we'll really see what ends up happening there. Speaking of Kyle Pitts, a lot of people are saying he's the 2nd best recruit or 2nd best prospect after Trevor Lawrence. What do you think about Zach? What do you think about Kyle Pitts, and where do you think he lands, Mike?
I think he's definitely going to go in the top 10. I think the earliest I see him going is to maybe the Falcons, but I think it's more likely he'll go to the Bengals, or fall somewhere in the mid, between 5 and 8. So
you're a Bengals fan. Do you think the Bengals should take him over Jamari Chase or Penny Sewell?
Over Penny Sewell, that's like 50-50 to me. I don't really care which one they take. But I think that in terms of, I think they should draft Kyle Pitts over Jamari Chase just because I think, they still got some, Tyler Boyd is a decent receiver, but they really need help at tight end. So
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to see. I think Kyle Pitts would make a lot of sense in Dallas, but I don't know if Dallas is willing to make that move, even though, again, in my recent mock draft, I had him going there. It seems like Atlanta is kind of flirting with that, but they're also flirting with a quarterback. I think if the Bengals drafted any type of player to help out Joe Burrow, that would be a home run. However, Joe Burrow really wants him to take Jamari Chase, according to sources. And Jamari Chase, of course, was Joe Burrow's former teammate at LSU, and a lot of people have him as the best receiver. So I think Jamari Chase right now, I'm gonna tap him at 5. Do you think there is a sleeper that no one's talking about right now that could go into the top 10, Michael?
I think definitely one of the corners. I know JC Horn's one of them. I can't remember the other person's name. I could possibly see an rusher going early. And outside of that, I don't think so. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone else.
Well, I think, of course, Patrick Surtain is the best corner, and I could see him going in the top 10 easily. J.C. Horn's another guy, maybe Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech, but I think he could either go in top 10 or fall out of the first round completely. Then there's guys like Micah Pearson from Penn State that most likely, if you're not talking about quarterback, would probably be there in the top 5, even if the teams weren't exactly looking for quarterbacks. And then you have a guy like Kwity Paye from Michigan. I think he would be somewhere in the top 10. Or a guy like Jeremy Owusu from Notre Dame or Xavier Collins from TCU. There's a lot of good defensive players out there, but I feel like there's so many teams looking for a quarterback or an offensive weapon that you're not hearing about him as much. Who was your favorite prospect going into the draft, Michael?
I really like Kyle Pitts, and also J.C. Horn, I think is another one. And then I believe his name is Wyatt Davis. He's one of the tackles from Oregon State, or offensive lineman. I don't think a lot of people are talking about him, but I think he's probably one of the better offensive linemen in this class. But again, this offensive line class is so deep that there's so many good offensive linemen, but I think he's definitely underrated.
Yeah, you were just mentioning Wyatt Davis, and I think at most drafts he would probably be a top 10 pick, but because every team is looking for a quarterback or an offensive weapon, he'll probably fall out of the top 10. New England, I don't know if New England really needs a guard, but they would be nice. The Raiders at 17, they could definitely use a guard because they pretty much lost all their offensive line in free agency. I mean, maybe the Cowboys take an offensive guard, but I feel like their need is either another weapon, a pass rusher, a corner, and probably a an offensive tackle. So I think Wyatt Davis, he could go to the Chargers, I guess, at number 13. That's kind of a stretch, to be honest with you. I don't know if the Chargers really need to go that way, but I think if they did like the Bengals, just helped out Justin Herbert, I think that would be a home run. I guess we'll really see what happens. Maybe there's a team that trades him in the top 10. Maybe the Bears go for an offensive lineman, but I think they're just going to go ahead and wait and see what's there at number 20. But I just know it's going to be a fun draft. And after I think the Niners take Mac Jones, I think that's when the draft starts. But I haven't asked you yet, Michael. Do you think the Niners will draft Mac Jones or will they draft Justin Fields?
I was actually debating this in my mock draft. I'm not completely sold on Mac Jones yet. I don't know what it is about him. But I think that he's probably likely to go there, just so I put him there.
Yeah, I think that the Niners really like Mac Jones, and I think he fits their scheme, but I just think he's too much of a Jimmy Garoppolo to where, they're getting the same thing almost. And I think if you don't have the weapons around him, he's not going to be very successful. Yeah, they have George Kittle, and they have some weapons, but not like game changers outside of George Kittle. So, and I think Jimmy Garoppolo is the reason why the Niners didn't win the Super Bowl. Yeah, Patrick Mahomes was Superman that second half, but imagine if Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't miss those passes. They probably win the Super Bowl, and we were talking about Mahomes still without a ring. So I think they really need to get a quarterback, and I think Justin Fields or Trey Lance would be that guy, but they really like Mac Jones, and he's from Alabama. Yeah, he only played 17 games, but we'll see what happens if he does get drafted by the Niners and he doesn't have those weapons he did at Alabama. Like I said, he had Jalen Wall and Devontae Smith, and then he had Najee Harris, a really good running back. Speaking of Najee Harris, do you think he gets taken in the first round, Michael?
I think he should, but again, running back is kind of losing its value a lot. So I could see him falling in the second round, but I think he's definitely the best running back in this class, and I think he should go top 10.
I mean, I don't think he'll go top 10, but I do think
Or
he'll
not
probably
top 10. I'm not top 10. I meant to say first round.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense a lot. I mean, I think he's going to end up going number 24 to the Jets as of now because they need just anything to really help out Zach Wilson because I feel like they're just going to take Wilson. You know, maybe they take Justin Fields, maybe they shock a lot of us, but I think we all know they're taking Zach Wilson. But I mean, Zach Wilson's a great quarterback, but you're going to have to give him help. And really, they don't have much receivers. So maybe they do end up drafting a receiver. But at the same time, I think they're going to draft either a corner, safety, or a running back. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting, Michael, that you want to mention?
What's your top 5 draft for your mock draft?
My top 5, I got Trevor Lawrence at 1, Zach Wilson at 2. Then I have Mac Jones at 3, Kyle Pitts at 4, and Jamari Chase at 5. So I got all offensive players going.
I believe I had the same thing, except I had Penny Sewell going to the Bengals.
I mean, anything the Bengals can really take to help Joe Burrow, as I mentioned earlier, is a home run. And I think they're going to take an offense. I think for once they're actually going to listen to Joe Burrow or listen to their star player and take a guy that they really need because Jamari Chase would be a game changer. I feel like he could be like he could be the difference like what Justin Jefferson did with the Vikings this last season. So, I mean, I think Jamari Chase would be a great option. I mean, Kyle Pitts, of course, if he's still available. But I think a lot of teams right now are looking into taking, you know what, we should really look at the Florida tight end. All right, thanks for joining us, Michael. It's been a pleasure. And again, don't forget to check out his YouTube channel at Mr. M. And don't forget to subscribe. All right, thanks again, Michael. And we'll see you or we'll catch you on the flip.
All right, appreciate you having me, man.
All right, let's wrap up the show with our new segment, Questions from Instagram. And of course, this segment you can all get involved with. Just go to Instagram at sportstown_podcast. And every Wednesday, I'll have the segment up where you can ask me anything or anything sports related, and we will answer them. So again, we'll have up to 3. So there is a very good chance you will be mentioned in the Sports Town podcast. So the first question comes from @Nick Williams, and he asks, how many quarterbacks will be drafted in the first round? Well, I think there'll be 5 selected. There could be 6, but I don't think Kellen Mond from Texas A&M is going to be selected. Now, he could go in the first round instead of Justin Fields, or they all go in the first, but I think there's going to be 5. It's pretty obvious that Lawrence, Wilson, and Jones will be the first 3 quarterbacks taken, but I think Trey Lance will go somewhere in the top 10. And then I think Justin Fields will go later, but I think he'll go in that order. Lawrence, Wilson, Jones, Lance, and Fields. So again, thanks for asking me that @Nick Williams. The next question comes from @SteakLover66. I like steak too. I'm assuming this guy does as well. And he asked, who is my final prediction? And right now, it looks like it's going to be the Nets and Clippers. Before the season has started, I said the Clippers and Bucks, but I don't think the Bucks have enough to take down the Nets or even any team. Even I think a healthy Lakers or Clippers team can even beat them. This Brooklyn team is just really good. I just can't see anybody beating them. I think in the West, maybe the Lakers or Clippers. I think the Jazz and Suns are still 1 or 2 years away. They're still really young. But in my opinion, I think it's going to be the Nets or the Lakers or Clippers taking on the Nets. And I think the Nets, regardless, win in 6 games. So thanks for asking me that, SteakLover66. And this last question comes from @Jake_Newton. And he asked, his question is, who do you think should win the NBA League MVP? Well, that's a good question. It's really hard to say right now because Embiid and James were the front runners. They both missed some time, and I feel like they're both kind of out of it now. Curry's been having an unbelievable season, but his team isn't great, and they're struggling to even make the playoffs. You could make a case for Lillard, but it seems like Lillard's always being forgotten. He's been having a great season, but I think right now the front runner is Jokic. Jokic is the front runner. James Harden's been having a great season. Giannis, but again, Giannis won the MVP the last 2 years. The voters get voter fatigue. They don't like voting for the same guy 3 years in a row. But I think some voters are still mad at James Harden for what he did in Houston. So I think right now Jokic is the front runner. Good, definitely good question. It's gonna be fun to see what happens, but I think it's Jokic to lose right now. Thanks for listening to the Sports Down Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Down Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.